This afternoon is obviously a very special event. It is the first time that we have been able to welcome an undoubted national treasure to the Hospice UK annual conference. I am not going to go through Joan Bakewell's very many achievements and accomplishments, but I want to say just a word, and I'm not sure, Joan, that you fully appreciate this. I want to say a word about the impact that your most recent programs on aging and dying have had. I have been told by one chief executive of a hospice, and I'm sure there are others, who said to me they decided to come into the hospice movement because they were so inspired by what you have been saying. And so we owe you an enormous debt for what you've been saying and what you've been doing, and it's the most enormous privilege to have you with us this afternoon. We're looking forward to what you have to say.
Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, everybody, both those in the hall and those who are watching outside. And I'm going to talk really at random. I've got a few notes, but I like to talk extempore because I'm sort of responding to the sort of institutions you represent, and I very much want to learn from you. So there will be something like a quarter of an hour in which we can exchange opinion. You can tell me things I don't know, and I can take them back and absorb them into the outlook, which I try to reflect when I talk to older people. And what I do when I talk to older people is I begin with a poem. So you deserve a poem too. It goes like this. Age is opportunity no less than youth itself, though in a different dress. And as the twilight fades away, the sky is filled with stars invisible by day. Life gets richer as you get older in many ways, and one of the commitments that you have and I have is to invigorate the lives of all of us as we move towards the end of the life that we've lived. Dying is a very, very important part of living. And I believe we're going through a sea change in which people are coming to realize that and wanting to talk about it and are giving thought to it. So end of life is as precious as the beginning of life. All sorts of values come into their own as you come towards the end of your life. I'm in my 80s, so I'm not far away. I go more conscious all the time as my generation dies that it'll be my turn pretty soon. And I keep talking to my family about which hymns are we going to have. Do I like this hymn? For a time, I decided I wanted George Harrison's Here Comes the Sun. Well, why not? People talk about dying. They talk about the kind of event it's going to be. Now, we're all living much longer. And one of the things I have in common with all of you, and you have with the people to whom you bring comfort, is the one thing that is immovable. You and they are all moving towards your death. So every single one of you should be a recipient of the good news that you bring, the care that you offer, and the freedom you are now bringing to people to talk about their lives and their deaths, which are one. We're all going to live a very lot longer. 1 in 3 of the children born today will live to be 100. 1 in 3. There are 15,000 people today who are 100 and over, and I recently made a panorama program about them, in which I visited about 7 or 8, and about 5 of them were featured in the program. They were people who were sometimes in care, but mostly living independent lives. There are 15,000 people who are 100 years and over, And in 2030, there will be 30,000. So there are a great many people living to a great age. There are 500,000 people who are over 90. And this isn't just about Western Europe, this is global. Japan has 50,000 people who are over 100 and makes lavish provision for keeping them fit, exercised, offered particular diets. Actually, you only have to think about the Japanese diet. It's kind of raw fish and seaweed, isn't it? Something approaching that. But you don't see very obese people in Japan, well, at least not when I was there. So every country has to approach the fact that people are living longer, and it's quite likely, if the pattern is continued, that they will spend longer dying. I don't mean in need of palliative care. I mean the graph in which they first have the first diagnosis that there might be something going wrong with their body. And whereas once we lived and then we died quite quickly, people now live and then their illnesses begin, and they have a large part of the end of their life not being fully fit. And I think that is a very precious part of life, because strange things happen. I mean, speaking personally, my appreciation of things shifts. I'm more interested in nature than I ever was before. People who are old and aging and ailing have a love of nature, because nature is the cycle of life in which they are beginning to appreciate their own place. So I sometimes wonder, how many more springtimes will I see? And when spring comes, I look at the buds and the blossom in a particular way. It has become precious to me in a way that it hadn't when I was young. And autumn is the same. A great sense of the melancholy of autumn, but nonetheless the fact that the decline of the trees, the beautiful falling golden leaves, is the harvest of life. And that's what I'm living. So I define myself as living in the autumn of my years. So nature becomes very important. You will know, of course, that music becomes very important to people who are in your care. And only recently, some of you may know about this pilot, but an organisation called Music for the Mind is springing up and running pilot schemes. I'll tell you more about that later. So we're all living greater age. When George VI created the birthday card, the 100-year-old birthday card, in 1917, he sent out 24. This year, the Queen set out 6,000, and she's had to set up an office to deal with these increasing numbers of people who all boast, when I went to their homes, there is the card from the Queen. So part of the development of our awareness of our aging, there are many social implications, of course, but those that struck me is the increasing engagement of the people you might call the professionals with the consumers. We're all consumers. You're all on the path to your deaths at some stage. But the people who are immediately engaged as people who need care and those around them. And with everything else in our society, everybody has an opinion about it. There was a time when there were experts and the others were told to shut up and be quiet and listen to what the experts have to say. You will know that that is no longer so. Everyone has an opinion about their life, how they want to live it, how they want to leave it, and particularly in terms of their family. I'm speaking of all sorts of things, things like palliative care, but also things like wills, what they leave behind. As I said, the music at the funeral. A few years ago, if anyone had suggested to Radio 4 that we should start a series of programs called We Need to Talk About Death, it would not have got anywhere. The BBC would have said it's too dark a subject. But why is it a dark subject? It's an inevitable part of our life, which we all want to bring to a serene conclusion. And darkness should have no part of it. How are we to get to a situation in which death is talked about, embraced, respected, and treated in a way that we all feel comfortable with? So 2 years ago, the BBC's radio science department thought of the idea that I should present a programme about we need to talk about death. It sprang out of a series that I did called Inside the Ethics Committee, which some of you may remember, in which we dealt with difficult moral issues. And it was felt that this story, talking about death, sprang from that background, and indeed is made by the same team. Well, last year we didn't anticipate the reaction to it that Michael has spoken of. It was very greatly welcomed, and people, even the Director General of the BBC stopped me in the corridor and said, "I so wish I had heard your programme before my parents died." So we are getting thanks from people who have admitted that they had dilemmas. We all have dilemmas. When those we love are dying, we are thrown into a paroxysm of grief, anxiety, anticipation, all the sorts of memories that we cherish but we fear losing. And I've been at 1 or 2 deathbeds in my life, and I'm so glad I have, because in fact they are very serene occasions, if you are fortunate. My father was dying in hospital, and I'm very interested in the idea that people are still autonomous, whatever is happening to their body. My father had clearly got a decision in his mind. He'd lost this power of speech, but he knew his first grandchild was about to be born. He knew that was the next major event in his life. So everyone was alert. The mother was due to go into labour. My father was given hours, days to live. One's in the north, Stepping Hill in Stockport, and one is down in Dorset. What to do? I'm at my father's bedside. We hear the news the baby's born. My son says, "We're in the car, we're on the way. Hang on, hang on." I whisper to my father, who has lost the power of speech, that the baby, he has a grandson, and the baby is on the way. A great-grandson, sorry, I'm the granny. The baby is coming, they're bringing the baby. And he sits up in bed and attempts to speak. He clearly hears and understands what I'm saying. And the baby is born, brought into the hospital. He forces himself up and holds out his arms, and we put this newborn baby into his arms. Well, my son cries, I cry, we all cry, and my father just gazes at the baby. The family go home. Within 24 hours, my father is failing, and I sit beside him talking, and I eventually say to him, "You have seen him. He's named after you. You can go now." And he died. He had somehow decided that that was going to be the event that he stayed alive for, and he died peacefully knowing that. Now, I have held that in my mind, and I remember it with great clarity, and indeed when I speak of it, I sometimes get a lump in my throat, because it was so meaningful for him, and for my son, and for myself. And I will never forget it, and I like to imagine that these are the sorts of occasions when you are bringing care to people that they live through, because they will certainly remember them. Powerful memories live on and enrich the lives of those who remain. So my father's death was an enormous inspiration to me. And I remember I was brought up, I'm in my mid-80s now, so I remember a time when things were enormously severe. Children were discouraged from going to funerals. Nobody wanted to look upon the dead body. Nobody took the coffin to the house and had people come and look at the body. There were all sorts of rules about what it was correct to do, and nobody bothered to deal with them. Cancer was called the big C. It was considered unlucky to use the word. Now, that's a long time ago, I know, but I've lived through huge changes into the world of which you are spearheading change all the time, and which through the programs I do, I'm hoping to change things myself. We did programs with 3 programs in each series. We did a program about who will care for me. We did a program, we found this even more daring, what happens? What happens as you die? And how will you know? And what will happen to your body, to the temperature of it, to the feel of it, to the tips of your fingers and your toes? What exactly is rigor mortis? We did this in great detail. And I felt rather uneasy because it was so explicit. But the response we got was, I wish I'd known. I wish I had known about this. You've taken away some of the mysterious fear that I have always felt was there. That was a very important program to do. But we did another program about how do I get ready? I mean, how does the person who is falling ill get ready? And you will be familiar with all the things that need to be organized. The power of attorney, the nature of a will, all sorts of advanced directives, all the matter-of-fact things that sound easy enough. I'll sign a piece of paper, I leave it all to my wife, my husband, my lover, whatever. And it isn't, if you get round to it, anything like as easy as that. So what I discovered in making the programs was how families are taking on board the wish to be engaged with all this concern. Now, I'm very fortunate my family get on with each other. We don't always agree, but we speak and celebrate life and its events together. But there are families that don't. One of the things I've discovered, that the point of death is a great reconciler. When the month coming up to someone's death that is anticipated, very often married partners who are together, enjoy a sort of a new intensity of their emotional attachment to each other. It rekindles some fire, some devotion, some deep, deep, visceral attachment that helps their relationship blossom in the knowledge that they will soon lose it entirely. That's a great reward for taking on board the prospect of departure. And also what happens is you get siblings or parents and children that have quarreled, traveling long distances to make good the hurt that has wrenched them apart during their lives. They've not spoken for decades, but the message comes, she's not got long to live. People take flights to get here in time. They make an effort to be at the bedside and to hold the hand, physical contact being enormously important. And of course, we believe that people hear one after they've lost the power of speech, so people can communicate what they felt. They can talk, they can say, I've really always loved you. I don't know what happened, I'm sorry it went wrong, but I'm here. So the engagement of families and the family bringing to the bedside their own emotional history and their expectation and being explicit about the bonds they have with the dying will ease things for the dying, but also ease the grieving when it comes, because grieving is an enormously important, as you will know, part of living and living on. So this season, We're doing 3 more of these programs, and only earlier this week I recorded one of them. This was about leaving your body to science. Now, one of the things we say at the end of the program, the last series, was, if you have a question that you would like us to tackle, will you please, write in? We gave the address, and a great many people said, how do I give my body to science? So we're doing an entire program about that, and I have learned much. For example, you might think, and many people assume, that what you do is you write in your diary, this, and this, and I leave my body to science. It isn't enough. It won't do. It will carry weight, but it will be very, very difficult for your people who leave behind to carry that out. It's a decision that has to be made earlier. Lots and lots of people are making it. I spoke to someone who was responsible for registering people who want to leave their body to science, to medical science, in London and the southeast, and they served the 6 London hospitals. She has 10,000 people on her books, 10,000 names of people who said, they attach their name, and she will know in which region they live, so that when they die, the movement can go into operation, because you will know, I'm telling you things you know, that they have 5 days in which to take the body to the medical school where, and this is a rather difficult part of the program to make, we talk about how they have to embalm the body before they can use it and hand it to medical students. And we actually had a recording of this being done in a mortuary and with the people who do the embalming. So we are a very explicit program. We don't make an apology for it because we want to talk about facts, but we do just say to people, this is quite a difficult listen, but we stand by the fact that this should be out there. And I learned a great deal I didn't know anything about embalming. I didn't know that there's a hard fix and a soft fix so that the body can stay pliable. I didn't know what happened to how the body was dealt with by students. And what I certainly only knew from a friend was that after a body has been donated to science for 3 years, medical science, the bodies are gathered together and the medical schools hold a service of remembrance and thanksgiving to which many, many friends and relations attend. It's not essential that the students do, but on the whole, all the students want to go, and they offer their thanks and talk to the relatives and say, he was my first teacher, or she was the first person who taught me about the human body, and I am going to be a doctor, and I will remember them as my first teacher. I found that very moving. An episode we haven't yet done, burial at sea. Who has thought of burial at sea? Now, one of the interesting things is that the parish churches in this country, on the whole, are full. You will find it very difficult to find. I had the idea of an English country churchyard, buttercups in the grass, the tall grasses blowing in the spring air, and a little stone saying she's here. She won't be. They're full. There's no space. Unless you've got a family vault, a tomb, you won't get there. So you may well end up in one of these huge, well-attended, but very large civic cemeteries. Or you may decide to be buried at sea. It's quite difficult to organise. There are particular graveyards out at sea which are designated places where people can take their body or the ashes and deposit them with a ceremony in that particular place. Who'd have known? I didn't know at all. Indeed, I know of people who have wanted to bury their partner at sea and have taken the urn with the ashes out to sea themselves not in this country, it would be frowned on, but I don't think they would have cared very much, and have themselves dived down in the bottom of the sea, opened the urn and seen the ashes float through the blue water in the Caribbean it was. And I thought, what a marvellous attitude to death. They had taken so much trouble to cherish the person when they were, as it were, technically no longer there, but clearly were there in the ashes and in their hearts, and go to the trouble of doing this remarkable thing. And again, an event that will nourish their bereavement and help them recover and be part of the lives they shared together to the very last moment. So we are going to tackle death at sea. The third subject we're doing is perhaps even more strange. It is to me because I'm of a generation whom it doesn't really strike, but we are going to be doing digital dying. When you die, you write on a piece of paper what you want to happen to all your goods. This generation, anybody younger than me really, which is most people, have laptops, have emails, have podcasts, have loads of records that are all digital. And they've probably written a will saying they leave the family photographs, but they haven't thought, or some of them haven't thought, of what happens to all this digital stuff. And quite a lot is organised. It's now possible to leave a digital will, to leave all your digital property. And so that is a subject we'll also be tackling. The number of subjects is endless. When we drew up our first programme plan to do 3, we thought there's quite a lot of subjects here. We could do a second series, and we drew up the second series. We've now got a list so long we could go on doing it year on year on year, because the more you do, the more you throw up ideas, and people write and said, have you thought about this? And I dearly need to know about that. Dying abroad, dying on holiday, insurance, wills, quarrels about wills, disputed wills, so many different issues. So just before I'm going to ask you to ask questions, I'll mention one that's just come to my attention in the last few days. You probably heard of it, but music is one that matters to people, because as they're dying, they probably can't read easily. I hope I can still read, but they can listen through their headphones. And this is a pilot that's being set up. It's called Music for My Mind, because everyone who's aging has memories of the music of their lives more vividly in their memory than the conversations they had. Everyone remembers the school hymns. Everybody remembers the music from their wedding. People remember pop songs where they danced. They remember music that they've loved. And this scheme, Music for My Mind, puts together a selection of music, individual by individual, to offer particularly to people with dementia, who, when they hear this music, start to smile. We don't know whether they appreciate it or not because they can't express it, but it's clear that they respond. They start to tap their toe and they start to smile. How wonderful is that? So this is a new initiative. I know it's just getting off the ground. They're doing pilot schemes here, it says to me, and it's the sort of thing that comes my way. So more and more information. You will be information rich, I'm sure, in each of the hospices where you are. And you are all and each learning all the time of new ways to carry forward our attitude to death and make it a rich part of our living. Thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much, Joan. Joan has agreed to answer questions, and she's going to orchestrate the questions. But please ask your question through a microphone, either one of the fixed ones, or I think we've got 1 or 2 roving mics. One.
Where's 2?
Because
1, 2.
Because otherwise the people who are watching or listening to the stream will not be able to hear. So,
Right, who's going to ask the first? There's usually a pause while somebody... Yeah, we don't... Oh, good, and you're right near number 2. Thank you.
Hello, Joan. I really enjoyed that presentation, thank you. I haven't seen your programmes, but I'd be interested to watching them, having heard of what you said. I'm Sheila Chapman. I'm a trustee at St Cuthbert's Hospice in Durham, and I would be interested in your views, on assisted suicide. I don't know whether any of your programmes have addressed the whole notion of assisted suicide and whether people should have the right to end their own lives in the UK, but I would be interested to hear your views on that.
Fine. I'm not surprised that question has come up, but in fact it came up number 1, is something of a surprise. When the series was launched and we proceeded to invite the public response, it's a radio programme, so you want to listen to it on the radio, an enormous number of 2 sets of people wrote. People wrote and said, why haven't you done a programme about assisted dying? We really want to discuss assisted dying. And another group of people wrote and said, why haven't you done a programme about the hospice movement? We really want to talk about the hospice movement. And what, of course, is interesting is that both of those sets of opinion overlap, intertwine, concerned with the same matters, have divergent views, very divergent views. There isn't a block view of one or a block view of the other. Everyone carries in their mind all the nuances of the argument. The programme makers and I felt that to do a programme about what is a very political issue. Now, I use the word political with a small p because it's a divisive issue whose outcome will depend on state legislation. And we felt that that was to embark on a whole commitment to debating law, attitudes to law, representation, and that we would have to find a nuanced way of doing that. So we have set that down, set that aside, because it would be a clash of people's points of view. And we are very committed to bringing people with us into a shared set of discussions. People can disagree with what we said, but we know that information will help them come to their own judgment. Now, I have my own view of this. It's no surprise to some of you here, I know, that I am a member of A Dignity in Dying, a fact that I set aside absolutely when I'm discussing this programme. I think it's extremely complicated, and I'm very interested in people themselves debating the issues around it, which I'm sure you do. But I think we have to come together for good outcomes for everyone and be guided by a shared wish that people should find their own way to a decision about their own lives. My friend, the playwright Nell Dunn, wrote a play called Home Death, and I don't know whether any of you have done it or seen it, or it's often been presented, and I got a presentation of it in the House of Lords when the debate on assisted dying was going forward, because I wanted both sides to speak about this issue. And her play is politically neutral and enormously insightful. She wrote it after her partner had died. She went round interviewing other people who had lost a partner. It was done in the House of Lords. I had contacts with actors who came forward to do it, and it was enormously moving, and it prompted a lot of good discussion. And that's my attitude to the issue, that we need good discussion going on between people who think that they strongly disagree and that the argument is over. And I wanted the argument to go on. My answer is, the argument goes on. Yes, another question? No, I can't see anybody. Oh, there, somebody here? Can you, which is the nearest? Oh.
Hello, I'm Philippa Shreve from Treetops Hospice Care in Derbyshire.
Can you hold the microphone?
Sorry,
because I'm a bit deaf.
We've been involved in looking at work around compassionate communities, and one of the things that strikes me is about our engagement of the younger generation. We often have conversations like this with older age group, and getting to that point when you start to think, as you say, your connections with nature and the cycle of life. But for me, there is something about how do we engage with the young? Over my years, I have watched how Halloween becomes a much more exciting and a moment in the course of the year. But how do we use things like Halloween, that concept of the Day of the Dead, to actually engage with another age group and part of our communities that find this really hard to talk about? And wouldn't it be great if perhaps some of the programmes that you've been involved with could actually be broadcast on Radio 1, say, so that we actually start to talk to a younger age group?
Thank you. I think the issue about Halloween is quite indicative, because Halloween is full of spookiness and fearfulness. It's got its root in horror and scaring people. And so at the heart of Halloween is the sense that there's something out there we're scared of. And if you were to identify it, it's probably death. So that is encouraging a whole lot of fear and panic and revulsion at death, because we've got to do all sorts of things to stave it away. However, it could be the way, rather devious way, into discussing death with the young. Now, my sister was a nurse, and she was attached to a ward where children were dying. She was a specialist in the death of children. It caused her a great deal of introspective melancholy, because it was so dreadful to live through it with the child and with the parents. But we know that children die, and this is a completely different life pattern to that of older people, and unbelievably painful for everyone. And it may well be the sort of subject that we should be discussing, but I think it's important to defuse the idea that death is spooky, punitive, and violent. And these are bad messages, and you get messages like that from all the blockbuster movies. I mean, who are we in flight from? Who are we running away from? Who is haunting us in the next room? It's associated with death. So in a way, you can see why the great religions have tried to transform that into a sense of transcendence and beauty. It's why we have angels with lovely wings. It's why we have soaring music, because the idea of fear is something we have to acknowledge in ourselves and then confront, and in a way, if we're fortunate, transform. But the sooner we talk about it with small children, the better, and make it less about spookiness and more about love. Okay, where are we?
Tracy Bleakley, Chief Executive of Hospice UK. Joan, one of the topics that you said a lot of people wrote to you about was the hospice movement itself. And you alluded to the idea that some of the views might be divisive or different. I'm just wondering if you can give us an external sense of how people view the hospice movement and the sorts of views that people put forward to you.
Oh, I hope you haven't misunderstood me. Nobody is hostile to the hospice movement. It's held in huge regard. There's no doubt about it. I mean, I would have thought if you were to do, a list and a competition for the most highly respected, universally acknowledged movement that deserves our thanks and our praise, it would be the hospice movement. I don't think anyone is any doubts about that. What I was pointing out to, and inadvertently misleading you, was the idea that the feeling about there is a misunderstanding that there, on the one side, there is the dignity in dying people who want to give permission for people to end life, and the hospice movement opposes that. Now, many in the hospice movement do. It's by far, it's not nearly as simple as that, but that was how perhaps you extrapolated what I was saying. Hospice movement is sublime. I mean, it's growing. Is it surprising it's growing? Not at all. Everyone speaks of it in hallowed and grateful terms. And indeed, the more it spreads and the more your activities spread out into the community, into people's homes, the more we will come to rely on it with hope and with affection. So I've been in the homes of people who are dying, and the hospice people have arrived. The palliative care teams have arrived with and been enormously welcome, been generous with their time, staying at all hours. So, I mean, we depend on it.
Do you think people are scared of it? Do you get the sense sometimes when people are thinking of it for themselves, they might think of it as death's departure lounge or something to be feared? Or
I think, people don't like to think of their own death. So if they think, well, if I end up in a hospice, it means I'm on the way out, it's likely to be true. And it's important that they know that. I don't think, I think there was a tradition when I was young that you said to someone who was dying, don't worry, they'll think of something, there'll be other tests. And it was a lie. And I don't think we live in times of lying anymore. I think people are much more open and more eager for the truth. And indeed, for someone to be dying and be told that they might still survive more than they might is to delude them. What we want is a serene going from this world, a serene way out in peace and without pain. People worry a very great deal about pain, and I think pain is the subject we're going to have to tackle in full very soon. But that's, if you suddenly find yourself in an ambulance and it says hospice, you think, I've just broken my leg, what are they on about? You're misguided, You need to know why you're going to a hospice.
Thank you.
Joan?
Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Hello, here.
Where am I? Oh, yes.
Right at the top.
Over here. It's funny, isn't it?
Point me. Oh, yes, there you are.
Right. I'm Jo Yardley. I'm from Hospice in the Weald. If I was to ask the people in this room to stand up if you're over 50, I fear a good deal of us would do that. Joan, who's the workforce in the future?
It's a complicated question. We're all going to be part of the workforce, and we're all going to be having to look after each other. There are so many changes afoot that everything, we can't leave it to someone else to organise. Much as I'm vocal in debates, as Michael will know, about helping the old and welfare, social care, and all these organising tropes expecting the state to provide, we can't hang around. By the time we're older, we've all got to help each other. Now, the burden that I found when I made my programme with the centenarians is the burden this places on those in their middle years. Because middle years families are worrying and caring for their older parents, some of whom will have dementia, at the same time that they're looking after teenagers, bank of mum and dad, and all the responsibilities of that. So there is a segment of the population, neither young nor very old, who is having a really heavy burden placed upon them. We can only share it as much as we can. I do believe that we will all be working longer. I also know that all jobs that can be automated will be automated quite soon, and that artificial intelligence will do all the chores which currently employ a great many people and a source of income for people in care centres, for example. Those kind of jobs can be automated and slowly will, probably a bit faster than we anticipate. So the nature of work will change, and the nature of the hours, the nature of commitment, the nature of employment, and the nature of what we do with our time. How do we live? I mean, I've been talking about how we die, but how we live is also part of our planning now. And everyone is able and should be empowered to make choices that suit them. Not always easy. It certainly isn't easy if you don't have the means and you don't have the choices that money brings. So I'm part of, the relatively well-off middle class. I've got lots of choices, but we all know people who don't have money and don't have choices.
Absolutely. I'm the carer for my 90-year-old parents, as well as working. So I feel that very greatly. What I've done over the last year is write a programme of topics called Learn to Care for people who are going to be family caregivers. Because I see that as the only way forward. Thank you.
Yes. I mean, you're quite right. Thank you for that. I mean, people do give of their time to their parents. There's an obligation that survives in society. It's tribal and it's true and it's just that we really do owe an obligation to our parents. And it's wonderful to see that deployed when parents fall ill, and the love that is revived sometimes, renewed, as they go towards their deaths. Thank you all very much.
It's with huge regret that I bring the session to an end, because it has been so remarkable. Joan, you've been perceptive, you've been inspiring, you've been completely brilliant, and you have put us in your debt yet again. Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.